Welcome to Case by Case. We want to just take a moment and remind you that this content is intended for adult audiences. It is created for educational and informational purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as discussions may include references to real criminal cases, violence, and other sensitive and potentially distressing topics. While we strive to present every case with accuracy and respect those involved, the material may not be suitable for all viewers. Please proceed thoughtfully. And remember, if you need to take a step back, if you find something that concerns you, if you find it to be triggering and you need to take a step back, please do. You can join us whenever you're ready to come back. We'll leave the light on. Welcome to Case by Case. Today we are going to start the recap series of the Colin Gray trial. It's taking place in Georgia, and he is the father of Colt Gray. Colt Gray is an active shooter who killed 4 people at Appalachia High School on September 4th, 2024. So before I start with yesterday's trial recap, let me give you an overview and some details about the case and why it's important and why I felt like we should talk about it. First of all, it's not common for parents to be charged for the crimes of their children. It's often thought of that the children are responsible for their own crimes and parents are not held liable for that. However, Colin Gray was charged with second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter because of his role in Colt's activities, and I'll explain that in a minute. If you remember a while back, we had the Jennifer and I forgot the husband's name, Crumbly. Ethan Crumbly was a student who went in and shot his school up, and that was in Oxford, Michigan. They tried both parents, the mom and the dad, James and Jennifer, that was their names, and they were both found guilty. But it wasn't like they were parents sitting and doing, everything they could to stop their child from doing this. There were warning signs all along the way, and both parents not only refused to deal with those, but they bought him a gun, took him to the gun range, trained with him, and encouraged gun usage. And when the shooting took place, it was no big surprise to either of them that it might be their son that was carrying it out. So that's what we're looking at here in this case in Georgia. The case here is Colt shot 11 people, 2 students, 2 teachers were killed, and 7 others were injured. He immediately was taken into custody without incident, and he was charged with 4 counts of felony murder. But once they started investigating and found out where he got the gun and all of the circumstances, they charged the father. So, let's talk a little bit about what happened here. Appalachia High School is in Barrow County, Georgia. That's about 50 miles from Atlanta towards the mountain area. It's northeast. And all Georgia schools, I want to note, are legally required to complete at least one active shooter drill by October 1st each academic year. 1 week before the shooting, all the teachers at the school were issued an ID that includes a panic button. And they were taught about how to use that panic button, how many times to push it based on what the circumstances are. And what it does is it includes dynamic digital mapping with real-time locating capabilities. I mean, it's a game changer. The classroom doors at the school lock automatically, and they require opening from the inside. You cannot get into them with a key. Well, maybe you can get into them with a key, but my understanding from what I watched was once they're locked down, they can't be unlocked. Maybe you can only unlock them with a key. Either way, this is a step forward. So there were warning signs in this case. This is not a situation where all of a sudden, bam, here it is. There were warning signs. There was a call placed to the high school stating that 5 schools would be targeted and that Appalachia would be the first. A second call from the shooter's mother lasted about 10 minutes and warned of an extreme emergency and requested that they find her son. They were not able to do so, and there's a couple of reasons why. First of all, here's some warning signs that happened that day. One of the things is, on the day of the shooting, Colt had only been in that school. This was his second day there. He had been enrolled 5 days, but he had not come to class. He had a habit of missing school, skipping school, and his life was not stable. His parents were split up. His mom had some form of, I believe it was drinking issue. She was in and out of either rehab or jail, or she was not able to really care for him. So he was living with his father, and his other siblings were living with the mom. And there would be times the mom would call and say, I can't handle it. Come get the kids. And all of them would go live with the dad. So the dad was having to be a single father, which is a lot of what the defense is going to talk about. But, and while I sympathize with that, when I go through what I'm about to tell you, you'll see why it's a little more complex than that. And it's not your average case, and it's not your average parent circumstances. So that day, Colt, the shooter, had gone to the teachers and asked what they would do if there was a shooting. Did they have a shooting drill? And the teacher said, yeah, we had one just last week. But of course, Colt wasn't in school then. But the teacher thought it was strange enough that she reported it to someone in the front office. Hey, this is kind of strange. He asked about this. And, she wasn't sounding any alarm bells necessarily at that point, but it did catch her off guard enough to where she said, I think I need to say something about this. So Colt went to school that day, and at a little after 9:30 that morning, he texted his father, I'm sorry, it's not your fault. You're not to blame for any of it. And then at 10 o'clock, he texted his mom, I'm sorry. He left his classroom around 9:45, and he indicated that he was going to see a, what did they call it? It's not, it's some type of counselor, but he indicated he was going to see the counselor. And so they said, yes, that's fine. You have to sign yourself out. And then when you leave, those doors lock behind you so that you can't just walk right back in. Someone has to actually leave them in. So what happens is Colt goes into a student restroom. He comes out carrying a backpack with a rolled up white poster board sticking out of the backpack. Of course, that is wrapped around his gun. And At the same time that, this was going on, there was another student with a very similar name, Colton Gray, who they thought they were looking for. So they were trying to track down this Colton Gray, only to realize later that it was Colt Gray that they actually needed to find. So they actually went and got Colton Gray instead of Colt Gray. It was just one of those very odd coincidences that had they got Colt Gray, they probably would have stopped this from happening, but they didn't realize. It was 10 minutes later that they realized they got the wrong student and they began searching again. Now at a little after 10:15, Colt's mom texted the father suggesting he leave work and saying they're going to need you at this school. The shooting began minutes later. So, I mean, that makes you wonder what the mom knew, but at least the mom was trying to alert the dad. So, when Colt goes back to his class, of course, he's got the gun, but he has to knock on the door, right, to be let in because it locked behind him when he left. And his student sees that he's got the gun, tells the teacher, no, he's got a gun. So he goes and enters a nearby classroom and starts shooting. So now I'm going to talk to you about why this case was brought against the father, and we're going to recap what happened in trial yesterday. So yesterday's trial was all about the opening statements of both parties and the first witnesses. The opening statement of the state was real clear. This father not only was warned, but he bought him a firearm and left it in his room even during many, many warning signs. And the prosecutor did a good job of laying out a situation and then say, and the firearm stayed in Colt's room. And the firearm stayed in the shooter's room. And the firearm remained unsecured in his room. So one of the big things they pointed to is that Colt was enamored by other school shooters, specifically Nicholas Cruz. And for those of you that don't know, Nicholas Cruz was the shooter of Parkland High School in Florida, Florida. And it was called the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School. And he killed 17 people, and I can't remember how many were wounded. It was a lot. And as a result, to have him as someone that you admire, to me, is a huge warning flag. When our boys were growing up, if that had been the situation, I know how we would have reacted because there were some things that happened along the way, and I know how we did react. But this was a big warning sign, but yet it was not dealt with, and the firearm remained in Colt's room. And the firearm was given to Colt by his father as a Christmas present. After the father and the mother had been made aware that there were some issues related to Colt potentially sending out messages that he was going to conduct a school shooting. There was talk that there might have been a hit list. So this is what was in opening statement yesterday. Now, again, opening statements are not evidence. They are just the prosecutor and the defense attorneys laying out what they believe the evidence will show. They're allowed to give this big picture view of, hey, this is why we brought the case. This is what we expect to prove. But one of the questions that I keep seeing in all the chats of people that are streaming this is, why are they going through the shooting itself with these witnesses? And they have been. That is because under the law, when you're charged with this case, as Colin Gray has been charged, you have to prove that the crime took place. You can't just jump to, okay, this is how he aided this situation or neglected to act in this situation. You have to prove that it took place to begin with. So you've got to put on evidence about the shooter and about the shooting and about anyone who died and anyone who was injured, because you have to prove all of the elements of the original crime. So that's not something that they're just wanting to do. That's something that is legally required by the law in the state of which they are charging. And in this case, it's Georgia. But that is a rule across the states. You can't charge someone and then not prove the elements of the crime. So now that we've covered why they're doing it, the prosecutor went through all of this about why Colin, the dad, was culpable. The defense attorney did what you might imagine. He was a good dad. He was a loving dad. He was a single father for the most part, taking care of his son, and he had no idea that his son would do this. No one believes their kid would do this. But then the state opened with witness after witness of people who were there during the shootings, people who were shot, people who tried to help others that were shot. There was some very, very emotional testimony. There was a mother who found out that her child had been shot. Her child called her on the phone. She's assuming her child's okay. She's trying to tell her child where to meet her. And the child says, Mom, 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 I've been shot. And then you could have heard a pin drop. It was a very emotional moment during the trial. In addition, there were police officers and first responders that talked about, what they did and how they got involved. So I'm going to recap each day's trial for those of you that don't have time to listen to it or watch it. But I'm not going to go through every single witness because that would take forever. But the bottom line for day one for you to understand is there was an opening from both prosecutor and defense laying out the case, which we've just talked about. And there were witnesses that were teachers, students, first responders. The teachers talked about how Colt came in class, and we saw a video of Colt being in the class with this poster board wrapped around his gun. Of course, no one knew at the time that it was a gun. And there was one point where he was really fidgeting with this and spent a lot of time fidgeting with this. And one of the teachers said they asked him, if he needed help or what project was it? Because this was only his second day in this school. He'd been registered 5 days, but he'd only been there 2 days. So what project really did he have? So we'll continue this evening with day 2 and talk about anything we have. Please visit our Case by Case Facebook discussion group. This is where we like to talk about all this. We don't just talk about Delphi and Gilgo and other cases. We talk about all of them. Just be respectful and, let's talk about what we think about this case. This is Case by Case, and I will be with you again this evening or in the morning.